So my name is Banabhatta Das, and I joined the Hare Krishna movement of Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada in San Francisco in 1972. I grew up in a more or less typical middle-class family in the United States, in New Jersey to begin with. When I was 13 years old, my father was transferred to Detroit, and there I spent my secondary education up to the end of high school in a suburb of Detroit called Grosse Pointe. And I had first contact with the devotees through my brother, Jagat Purusha Prabhu, who is my Vartman Pradarshika Guru, the person who has brought me to Krishna consciousness. I was in high school and I was more or less in a distressed condition because I was not happy with my studies. I was very unmotivated, and I began reading different spiritual books. And then my brother, who had already had contact with the devotees, he moved into the house. He had been living outside. He was older, graduated from college, etc. He had met the devotees in San Francisco and spent several years traveling and also visiting different temples. So when he came to Detroit at this time, I was in my last year of high school, and he decided he would live at home wearing full devotee attire, dhoti, kurta, shaved head, tilak, and he would just sleep over at home and go for Mangal Arti to spend the entire day at the temple in Detroit. And he did that for several months. And so I was living at home, so it was very, of course, surprising to me that my brother was so much interested in this Eastern philosophy of Krishna consciousness. So he used to read read Bhagavad Gita to me, and read Krishna book. And then he would bring me sometimes to the temple. I would go for Mangal Artik. And also he would take me to the Sunday feast. And although I was open to Krishna consciousness, somehow the philosophy didn't make a lot of sense. My background of my parents were basically agnostics. They were a type of very liberal-minded Christianity called Unitarianism. And it's really most people who go to the church have no idea, even from a Christian perspective, of who God is. And it's more or less people who are part of that are very social-minded, into doing good in the community, but really have no knowledge and no idea. And of course, so I was brought up as everyone else in that culture at that time. Pretty much everyone was eating meat and engaged in different materialistic activities. So I would go with my brother to the temple, and he recounted to me one incident when I was in the kitchen with him, cutting up fruit to offer to the deities in Detroit. And I was arguing with him how it's impossible for God to be a person. And yet here I am cutting up fruit to offer to Krishna. But he was very upset by this discussion. And I left the kitchen in a little bit of a huff. And he was wondering where I was and was a little worried about me. He looked all over the temple, couldn't find me. He looked inside the temple room, where a kirtan was going on. He expected to see me over in a corner somewhere sulking. And he didn't see me in the temple room, so he left, and he came back and he looked again, and he looked right in the kirtan, and I was right in front of the deities, jumping about this high off the floor. And so at that time he thought, maybe there is some hope for this boy. And so I continued and finished my high school education there. And it was quite interesting because I had a very prophetic dream during that time, which was very symbolic. In the dream, it was all dark, as if it was nighttime, and everything was darkness, but I could see in the distance the silhouette of a mountain. And this mountain, very high mountain, you couldn't see any details on it because, of course, it was all dark. Everything was dark in the green. Just the silhouette of the mountain was there. And all of a sudden I could see this trail of devotees winding up the path, going back and forth, climbing this mountain. They all had torches. It was a Sankirtan party, and they were chanting. And I remember seeing myself among the devotees. And so that was the first kind of prophetic dream I had that indicated that somehow or other I was to become a devotee. Although, as I mentioned, in that time, I had no idea. After school, which was the beginning of summer, my brother asked me to stay. He said, Srila Prabhupada will be in Detroit in a couple months. But my parents had wanted me to go to college. I was not too much interested. I was unmotivated in general. I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I picked a college out in the East Coast in New Hampshire. It was one of these experimental schools. There were only about 2,000 students. The school itself was housed in an old hotel way up in the mountains in New Hampshire. And so I went to that school. And as I spent my first semester there, I was also very much unmotivated by any of my classes. Even I remember taking a philosophy class, and everyone in the class was so artificially puffed up by some little, whatever little degree of knowledge they thought they had, that it was very disconcerting and uninspiring. And there was one class which I actually enjoyed very much, and that was theater. Because in theater, it was, it was some type of self-exploration that happened for me in that class. And it was very interesting playing the parts of different people in different circumstances. So at the end of that semester, my theater teacher approached me, and he said, Bill, he said, I haven't been able to give you very good parts in the plays we've been playing because they're devotees. We have a seniority, and the older students are having the better parts. So if you come back next semester, I'm going to be able to give you better roles, and I think you'll enjoy it even more. And I told him, I said, Mr. Bennett, I said, I love your class. I love the theater. It's a great place to learn different aspects of self-awareness, self-development. And I love you. You're a great teacher. I'm really learning a lot. But I have to be completely honest with you. And he said, what's that? I said, I'm playing the parts of so many different people, and I have absolutely no idea who I am. So at that point, I left with a friend of mine. And we had heard at that time, because that was the end of '71, and we had heard that at that time many young people thought that whatever you were going to get in life, whether it be success materially or spiritually, you would find that in California. So we didn't really have much money. We decided to hitchhike, which is very popular at that time. So we just took our belongings that we were bringing with us, went out on the road with a a small little backpack, and we stuck our thumbs out. And sometimes people would pick us up, and sometimes we waited hours for a ride. And we did this all the way cross country. And in a little over a week, I think, we made it out to California. And in California, my sister was part of a kind of a commune in Northern California. And so we stayed up there for some time, and we started doing some kind of exploratory use of LSD at that point, which many young people were getting into. Although our intention was that we wanted to find God. And this drug was something that opened up different areas of perception. And although it was really just another form of illusion in some sense, still it gave us kind of expanded perception. And so we experimented like that. And we were chanting Om at the same time. And then the other people on the ranch became a little bit upset because I think because there's somehow or other we had this intensity that we were trying to find God. And I think it upset people there to some extent, who were using drugs more as kind of an escape than more like we were trying to use like a tool for self-exploration. And I remember feeling nervous at that time, and going into the living room, and some devotees had stayed there before and had left a few books of Prabhupada. Actually, there was a poster of Krishna in my room. And because of my association with the Detroit Temple and my brother at that time, and there was a Krishna book there also, which I started reading, then I started offering my food. We started offering our food to Krishna. And this went on for another couple weeks. And then after a few months there, we went down to San Francisco, and we hung out for not very long as far as I remember, no more than about a week. We were just kind of wandering around the city, meeting new people. And then all of a sudden I was walking down the street, and right in front of me was a devotee in a van going out the alley next to the temple there. And the temple was right there. And I was just happened to be walking by it, and all of a sudden all my memories of devotees and Krishna consciousness flooded my mind. And so I immediately went in the temple, started talking to the devotees, and we started going to some of the programs there. I remember that we didn't actually immediately get beads and start chanting. I was still somewhat apprehensive. And so we would sit down. I remember specifically we would sit down in the lobby of the temple, and all the devotees were chanting around us. And the sound filled the air. It was almost like a beehive with bees buzzing, the Mahamantra, being chanted. This was nice. This was still 1972. And so we would just sit there. We had long hair, and we wore, strange clothes and things. But we just sat there, closed our eyes, and listened to the chanting of the devotees. And once in a while, we would attend a program. And I remember every day I would come back to the temple, every day for about a month, and ask question after question after question. And I remember after about a month, all my questions were answered, and I had no more questions. And so I thought about it, because of course they all were, hoping we would join the temple. And so I thought about this. I said, they've answered all my questions to my satisfaction. But I really was shy about joining the temple at this time, shaving our long hair, joining the temple. It was so much unknown. Although the philosophy appealed to us, there was still, a lot of uncertainties there. But I thought about it, I thought that, well, if I'm actually an honest person, I have to surrender and I have to try it. And so we did that. We joined the temple, they shaved us up, and I think like probably most devotees at that point, the rest became history. I mean, living in the ashram, getting up at 4:30, attending the programs, Mangal Arti and all the programs, getting such close association with the devotees, all the amazingly powerful programs there, which Prabhupada set up in such a scientific way to release us from our bondage to this illusion which we've been, our souls have been embedded in life after lifetime for millions of lives and species. So finally, we got the chance to become Krishna conscious. And I remember, with prasadam and with association, it was so ecstatic that we really never thought about material life again. Actually my Bhakta leader, and he was also kind of the Sankirtan leader at that time, because we really weren't doing book distribution when I joined. It happened shortly after that, but Prabhupada's books, only the Bhagavad Gita was printed and a few small other books. Gradually other books were introduced. But Jayananda was my Bhakta leader, and he used to take a group of us down to San Francisco, downtown San Francisco, and we would chant, we would distribute magazines, sell incense, get donations, and in this way, this is how we were able to maintain our temples in the early days. And this was very, very instructive also, and growing up in this particular era was really important, because now I've noticed, especially in the West, most of the temples now are maintained in different ways than book distribution. And I see the emphasis on book distribution has been less, not just the emphasis, because in Los Angeles, for example, they also, many devotees go out on book distribution. It's really, the kind of the, core activity of this temple. And yet, the temple is kind of overly dependent on like the Hindu community for donations and things, and it's changed the emphasis a little bit. So in these early days, everything was very, very simple and pure, and we were maintaining ourselves just by this BTG distribution and incense distribution. And Jayananda was of course an amazing devotee, because he had the heart of a saint, and he would talk in such a natural way, that in such a friendly way, that everyone would be his friend. And when he went out in because he was expert at collecting donations of boga, he would go to the flower market, get flowers done, and everyone loved him. And when he passed away eventually, everyone was asking everywhere, what happened to Jayananda? Where is Jayananda? In fact, there's one story, I'll just tell briefly, that in New York, just maybe a year before he passed away, he was organizing Rath Yatra there, and he went to get the permits. Or no, it was the year after actually he passed. And the lady there, because he was organizing Rath Yatra there, and the lady there, when the devotee went to get the permit, because Jayananda used to always get it every year, she said, "Where's Jayananda?" And she was just a worker in the permit office who gave permits. And the devotee told her that Jayananda has just passed away. And she broke down and cried. And just like that, so many outside people had so much attachment to Jayananda, because he was such a pure soul. So he helped forge my devotional mentality in Krishna consciousness in the early days, and I'm eternally indebted to him. He was very much a prasadam addict, and he was expert at developing friendships with people through distribution of prasadam, and he himself was a huge prasadam hound. He could eat literally mounds of halva. And I remember he was also very encouraging for especially new devotees. When we went out in the van, they would make Simply Wonderfuls, like a huge buckets of Simply Wonderfuls we would take out and distribute. And Jayananda's rule was that any devotee, before we actually reached the place where we were going to do Sankirtan, we could eat as many Simply Wonderfuls as we wanted. There was no limit. So he was very, very liberal in that way also. So I grew up in that way in San Francisco in the early days. Gradually the books were introduced. And somehow or other, I was recently talking with different devotees, trying to figure out when book distribution actually began. And pretty much the consensus was that in the United States, it pretty much began in San Francisco, when a devotee, I think it was Keshava, one of the older devotees, stopped the car for gas, ran into the gas station, and offered the attendant to give him a book instead of having to pay for gas. And that exchange happened. And after that, things just increased more and more and more and more. And Krishna, just amazing things happened. The devotees thought could never, ever happen. And we had devotees, the big silver Krishna books. There were devotees going out, and I remember we would go out and sometimes sell 5 or 6 in a day, and we'd come back and read the scores. And the devotees were ecstatic. And all of a sudden, devotees started distributing 10, 20, 25, 30. And Prabhupada encouraged this type of friendly competition towards the devotees. And then there was one devotee, wonderful devotee named Sarvabhauma. And Sarvabhauma started doing door-to-door and eventually got the record at that time, which I think it was something like 140 Krishna books distributed in one day, door-to-door. It was just like unbelievable, unheard of. So this created a whole new momentum of Sankirtan energy. And of course, we learned from Srila Prabhupada how this was the main instruction from his guru, that if you ever get money, print books. And so Prabhupada was so encouraged by the Sankirtan results and by this activity of pleasing Prabhupada through book distribution. We felt we were making very, very quick spiritual advancement. At one point, two sannyasis came to the temple after I was there a couple years. Guru Kripa Maharaj and Yasodhananda Maharaj. And Srila Prabhupada wanted to build these temples in India. This was a really strong desire that he had, because he knew that if the Krishna Consciousness movement is accepted in India, that the movement will reach a level of authorization which will help the movement expand all over the world. So he was very much keen in building temples, magnificent temples in the main holy places, Vrindavan and Mayapur, and also in Bombay. And so he wanted to build these temples. He had no idea how he was going to get the money to build these temples. So Guru Kripa stepped up, and he had a party of devotees distributing books and collecting. He was very expert in this area. And he told Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, I don't know how exactly, but I will find you the money. And so he'd heard from another devotee that the Japanese people who were mainly Buddhist, were very much, who had big hearts, who liked to give in charity. And so he thought maybe we could collect donations in Japan. And so he went with some devotees over there, and I was still in San Francisco Temple, but he had the most ecstatic kirtans I've ever been in. And during those kirtans, both he and Yasodhananda would jump about this high off the ground. And Yasodhananda at that time could play the drum faster than any devotee. And the kirtans were always really ecstatic. So somehow or other the seed was planted. I had a desire to go with this party. My temple president was not at all favorable to the idea. But somehow or other, after about a year, I consulted with all kind of different senior devotees and checked my own desire to make sure that I was doing this, not out of any desire for, for sense gratification for myself, but to expand my service to Srila Prabhupada. And so after about a year, somehow or other Krishna arranged that I could leave San Francisco, and I went to Japan and became part of that party. And so we were able to collect huge sums of money for building Srila Prabhupada's temples in India. And most of the money in the Mayapur project came from our party, also for building Vrindavan. And also Bombay, we gave a considerable amount of money to build Bombay and the construction in the early days. And also Srila Prabhupada had this formula for book distribution that 50% of all the book distribution sales would go back into printing more books. And the other 50% would go to new temple construction and for opening up new centers. And so a certain percentage, I don't know if it was 25% or perhaps more during that time, of the American book distributors went into building these centers in India as well. And so I worked with that party for some time. During the last year I was with that party, actually it was in 1976 that we were in Mayapur, and it was wonderful because we were able to be in Mayapur and Vrindavan the whole time Srila Prabhupada was there, before and after the festival. So we were able to go up to Prabhupada's room every day and have darshan. We were in Prabhupada's class every day. Prabhupada was there for Guru Puja every day. It was so inspiring. We were so fortunate. And at some point, Jai Bhataka Maharaj, just a little bit before the festival, I think it was a month or so before the festival, in 1976, Jai Bhataka Maharaj's temple commander either got sick, something happened to him, I don't remember specifically. So he approached Guru Kripa Maharaj and he asked if he could have one of his men to become temple commander at that time. So Guru Kripa nominated me to become temple commander. And so at this point, all the rooms on the perimeter of the property were just being finished. And so many devotees were coming for the festival in about a month and a half. And there was so much construction still that needed to be done. We didn't know if we were going to be able to finish in time. And so I was, helping with that. And one of the benefits of being temple commander at that time is that I had carte blanche. I had the permission to be able to enter Srila Prabhupada's room at any time. Because in the later years, it became more and more strict of who could actually enter Srila Prabhupada's room. And so I would enter quite often into Prabhupada's room. But I was very much, I would very seldom had a question for Srila Prabhupada. And if I did, just by Srila Prabhupada's presence, the question would automatically be answered without me actually having to ask the question. And so I would simply sit on the floor by the wall in the corner of the room, and I would observe Prabhupada, because at that time, Prabhupada was already very famous, and many people from Bengal, from different places would come and visit Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada, of course, was speaking in Bengali and Hindi. And I would just sit there and watch Srila Prabhupada, because Srila Prabhupada was so connected with Krishna. It was as if watching Krishna, every single movement of his hand, everything he spoke was so transcendental, was so directly connected with Krishna, that it was watching like poetry in motion. It was like it says in the spiritual world, every gate is a dance. And Srila Prabhupada's every movement was was mesmerizing and filled with spiritual potency. So I remember that. Oh, and I remember several pastimes which I want to share that happened during that time. So this is a very curious thing to many people. This is actually a huge cultural phenomena, and it's something that PhD scholars, religious scholars, have written books about. This, alternative movement of Krishna consciousness, how young people just got swept up into it. I mean, it's an amazing thing when you think about it, how some people get involved in Krishna consciousness, and especially when Prabhupada was here and started the movement, and we heard about Krishna consciousness, and within a very short time, we became full-on devotees and engaged completely in surrendered activities when we were brought up in a totally different culture with totally different ideas, no conception at all. Like I said, I was brought up agnostic or atheist. I had no idea of any kind of God as a person, or even God as a concept. It says in Bhagavad Gita, Icha dvesha samutena dvandva mohina bharata sarva bhutani samoham sargayanti parantapa. Krishna says that all living entities are born into illusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. So birth in India is a very special birth, and you've all spent so many different lifetimes of pious activities to be able to take birth even in India, in spiritual life. Krishna consciousness is a very natural thing. But in the West, how is it that hardcore meat eaters, people addicted, we were addicted to so much illicit activity, illicit sex, drugs, total speculation. How is it that we became so attracted to Srila Prabhupada's movement? So this was the power of Srila Prabhupada, but also I believe that this is all Leela of Lord Chaitanya somehow or other. And Lord Chaitanya's movement now is with all these great souls, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, everyone, all the spiritual masters in line from Lord Chaitanya of disciplic succession, but especially with the impact of Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur's preaching, Srila Bhakti Saraswati, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and Srila Prabhupada. Krishna consciousness is really taking root. And Srila Prabhupada said himself, he alluded to the fact that many of my disciples, or some of my disciples, may have been disciples of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in a previous birth. And so it's a very amazing thing how, so I just feel that this is Krishna's arrangement, that the golden era of Lord Chaitanya now is beginning, and then in the next 10,000 years we are going to see a golden age in Kali Yuga. And we should understand, Prabhupada's vision for the world, he was a revolutionary, he was a spiritual revolutionary. He was not small-minded, and his vision was to basically he saw Krishna consciousness taking over the world. His idea wasn't that we have a few temples or a few hundred temples all around the world and we just distribute a few books and wait for people to come to the temple. He wanted Krishna consciousness, the government to take it up and the people to take it up, and it to start to enter every fabric of human existence on this planet. So I really believe that there's so many devotees out there now, and that they have the spark of Krishna consciousness within them, but they don't know, they don't remember. And yet, when we approach these people, depending on our own purity and our own ability to give Krishna consciousness and give Srila Prabhupada without any motivation that we will see the flame of Krishna consciousness very quickly spread. And what Krishna can do through us is practically unlimited. And so this is what I believe, and I think this is already happening and will continue to expand as the movement develops. In the Vedanta Sutra, which was written just after Srila Vyasadeva wrote down all the Vedas and is considered the summary study of the Vedas. The first aphorism is Atato Brahma Jigyasa, that now is the time for self-realization. And this is a very, very important aphorism because human life, as Srila Prabhupada so many times would tell us, human life is meant for self-realization. Prabhupada would often say that the dog is running on 4 legs and our motor car civilization is running on 4 wheels. But if the dog is engaging in the same basic activities of eating, sleeping, sex, and defense, and human beings are simply, the purpose of their activities is also just for eating, sleeping, sex life, and some system of defense. Even though it may be very elevated materially, it's still the same basic activity. So this life is very short. We don't realize how short it is. It becomes shorter and shorter the older we get. And if you've ever been in a retirement home, which I have recently, my mother just passed away recently, and I spent some time taking care of her. And in that environment, when people start getting older and older, we have to realize that that's us. We're going to be in that same condition very soon. We are not this physical body. We are not a material personality having a spiritual experience. We are spirit souls having this material experience. And unless we develop our elevated spiritual consciousness by the mercy of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the mercy of Guru, his representative, then we will be very bewildered, not only at the time of death, but when we become very advanced in age. So Prahlad Maharaj says that during our youth, this is the time when we should start to develop our spiritual interests, because after all, we are spiritual beings, and all our interest in material activities, these are all actually spiritual desires that are covered by our material body and mind. And in Krishna consciousness, we can spiritualize these desires, and we can start seeing how everything in this world, that actually matter doesn't exist, that all these material things is simply Krishna's energy, just in another form. And Krishna consciousness is the science of utilizing a so-called material thing, because it's all God's energy, and utilizing those things for the pleasure of Krishna, for the pleasure of God. And in this way, our life becomes perfect. And in this way, the whole world, as it becomes enveloped in this consciousness of Krishna, will become very peaceful, will become very loving, and very tolerant, and all the wonderful qualities that we cherish in our spiritual leaders, we will find developing in our own self. And so this is actually the purpose of life, and this is something we should take to heart. So when I was a devotee in my early stage of joining the temple, of course, all of us were very interested to meet Srila Prabhupada. But at the time I joined, the management of the movement now was there. and there was, everything was organized in terms of the GBC and regional secretary, temple president. And I, being a new devotee, only a few months in the temple, it was very difficult actually for me to go in the room with Srila Prabhupada or to go on a morning walk. And of course, I felt very unqualified at the same time also. But especially in the first few months after I joined, although I could start to feel the effect of Krishna consciousness, and I could feel my spiritual persona start to develop and start to develop some detachment from matter and attraction to the principles of Krishna consciousness, I was still a very new devotee with a more or less still uncontrolled mind. And so I was looking for some kind of mystical experience from Srila Prabhupada that would give me this strong faith that Srila Prabhupada was actually my eternal spiritual master. And so Srila Prabhupada came to San Francisco, and I believe it was for Rath Yatra at the same time. And so I was somehow or other, I don't know how it happened, but I was able to go on one of the morning walks in San Francisco City with Srila Prabhupada. And as I was on that walk, I was trying to catch Srila Prabhupada's eye so that he would look directly at me. And I wanted some kind of confirmation. I mean, I knew that, all the books were talking about the importance of a spiritual master. The devotees who had met Srila Prabhupada were talking about him. And, I wanted to accept him as my spiritual master, but I still had, some doubts. And so I was on that walk, and every time Prabhupada would stop and make a point, I would try to catch his attention and look at him and have some kind of an exchange with him, even if it was only looking at each other. But somehow or other, Prabhupada was avoiding my gaze. And it almost, in thinking back on it, I think it was almost like I was trying to capture Krishna. And Krishna, can't be captured. Only when he wants to reveal himself can we realize his mercy. And so I kind of gave up the idea on the walk that I was actually going to get Prabhupada to actually look at me. And so I just kind of forgot about it. And all of a sudden, at some point in the walk, I remember Prabhupada stopped and he planted his cane and he looked directly at me in my eyes. Actually, I don't feel like he looked at me. He looked completely through me. And I had an amazing, mystical, spiritual experience with only in a few seconds of time. And in those few seconds of time, it felt exactly like Prabhupada had taken my soul and taken me back to the beginning of time when I first came into this material world. And then in the next instant, Prabhupada took me to the end of time in this material world. And then all of a sudden we came back, and I was there back in San Francisco with Srila Prabhupada. And something happened in my heart. And I felt this strong faith in Srila Prabhupada that my whole life never wavered. I never remember doubting Srila Prabhupada as my eternal spiritual master. It's the most amazing experience. And it gave me, the realization also that if Krishna wants to, or the spiritual master wants to, we can gain full surrender, full consciousness of our eternal identity like that. It's really up to the mercy of the spiritual master in Krishna. So that was the first thing that was really significant. Also, I remember during that Rath Yatra parade, it was amazing. I remember I was out there distributing books. Actually, this must have been 1973, because I joined in 72, in the fall of 72. And so it was Rath Yatra. Prabhupada was in San Francisco, and he was riding on Subhadra's cart. And I remember I was actually distributing books in Golden Gate Park, and I was going, up on the side of, a little bit away from where the carts were. And the atmosphere there was so transcendental that I didn't feel like I was walking. I felt that I was actually, it was like a dance. And everyone who was there, who I was distributing books to, the ordinary people who happened to be in the park and were part of Rath Yatra, were also part of that dance. And I remember coming up to people, it was like a dance. I would put my hand in the bag and I would bring out the book and I would hand it to them. And as I would hand it to them, their hand would go out and they would take the book. And then almost without asking, their other hand would reach in their pocket as part of the dance, and they would give me the money. And I would take the Lakshmi and put it in my pocket. And then the next dance move, my hand would come out with another book to the next person. And in looking in retrospect, I really feel it was because of Srila Prabhupada's transcendental presence there, that the whole atmosphere was so surcharged with bliss. I actually could swear that I could see in the air literally waves of bliss from the pleasure of Lord Jagannath and his pure devotees, Srila Prabhupada, being there, and the potency of spreading Krishna Consciousness movement in that environment. So then my next memory of Srila Prabhupada, and I'll give a few things because these are especially instructive. When I was in Mayapur, I had mentioned I had the service of being temple commander, and we were building these, finishing up these rooms on the perimeter wall. And the devotees were coming very soon, and I was a little worried that we weren't going to finish the rooms in time. And there were so many devotees coming at that festival. There were actually either one or two big 747 jumbo jets that had been basically chartered by the devotees and was packed with devotees. There were so many devotees on the plane. The devotees told me they had kirtan on the plane, with the devotees jumping down on the plane. They said they could feel the whole plane was going like this. The pilot of the plane had to come out and tell them to stop because they were afraid the plane was going to somehow go down or crash or something. So there were a lot of devotees coming. So I was a little bit in anxiety. And every devotee there were some devotees that came early for the festival, and I was trying to take every able-bodied devotee, Western devotee who came for the festival, who came early, to help us put in at least some time during the day in helping with the construction crew so we could finish the rooms. And there was one devotee that really bothered me. This was I remember he was a black-bodied devotee. He had a really strong body. He was from somewhere, I think in the US. And he wouldn't do any active service. He would simply take morning prasadam and he'd go out with his beads and sit in the banana patch and just chant all day long. And I was a temple commander. I was feeling like, this devotee, we need his help, and he won't do any active service. So I went to Srila Prabhupada. I went into Srila Prabhupada's room. I did my full dandavats, and I came up and I waited for Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada was chanting on japa when I came in. And as he would do many times, he had his knee up and he had his arm on his knee with his bead bag, and he had his face a little bit turned away from me. And he was just chanting, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Ram. So he was very absorbed, and I felt somewhat embarrassed disturbing Srila Prabhupada. But I felt I really needed some kind of, something from him, because I was very passionate in those days, but I just was frustrated, and so I needed some instruction from Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada was chanting, and he kept chanting when I came in. And finally he stopped his chanting. He looked at me and he goes, "Yes." And then he kept chanting, kind of looking a little bit away from me, but hearing me. I said, "Srila Prabhupada, I'm sorry, so sorry to bother you, but I have this problem I need some help with." I said, there's this devotee from the States. First of all, I explained that we're finishing, as you know, the perimeter rooms on the wall, and we're on a deadline. We don't know if we're going to be able to finish all the rooms for the devotees when they come. So every devotee who's coming early, we're asking them if they can help us to finish the rooms. And there's one devotee from the States, very strong-bodied devotee, and he won't do any service. He just sitting all day long in the banana patch and chanting Hare Krishna. And so Prabhupada heard me, and he kept chanting on his beads, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, for a little while, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds or something, thinking about what I said. And then he turns to me, looks right at me, and he goes, "So, you think chanting Hare Krishna is not service?" He said, "That is the greatest service." And I remember his head went like that, his eyes got really big, went like that. And then he looked back at me and I was like, "Jai, Srila Prabhupada." I offered my obeisances. I left the room completely defeated. And so although it was just one experience like that, it had such a big impact on my life that I carry with me to this day. The other pastime I wanted to tell with Srila Prabhupada was when, it was during the festival time in Mayapur, and all the GBC were having their meetings there. And GBCs, and there were many sannyasis there at the same time, and of course devotees from all around the world. Yet in the morning for Mangalarti, there were very few, there was like one or two sannyasis, because most of them were GBCs at that time. One or two sannyasis were there at Mangalarti. There were no GBCs that were coming from Mangalarti. And I just felt that it was not right. Here we are, a huge international movement, and our most important leaders are not there setting an example for the devotees. So I reluctantly approached Srila Prabhupada, but yet I felt it was my responsibility to do this. And I said, "Srila Prabhupada," I said, "I thought you should know that none of your leaders, none of the GBCs, most of the sannyasis, hardly any of the sannyasis are coming from Mangalarti. We have a few sannyasis there, that's all, no GBC men. And, they're not there, setting an example for the devotees of Mangalarti." So after I said that to Srila Prabhupada said, "Thank you very much." He sent me away. He called all the GBC men in. I actually told him that they're not coming for evening artik, for Sundar artik. They're not coming from Mangal artik. And so Prabhupada said, "Thank you very much." Sent me out, called all the GBC in. He said, and he talked to them. He said, "So, how long are your meetings going?" And they said, "Well, they're going into the night, Prabhupada, because we have, important issues." Prabhupada said, "From now on, all your meetings will end a half an hour before Sundar Artik. Everyone must attend Sundar Artik, and every single one of you must attend Mangal Artik." And so Prabhupada this is very instructive. And so Prabhupada made it clear, everyone understand very clearly that attending these programs for the leaders is essential for the health of the whole movement. And I remember the next day, when all the GBC members were there from Mangalarti, all the sannyasis, and I could feel this faith really was so much faith, more faith was there that we really are a big worldwide movement. And just, you know, you just feel it's so encouraging. And when you feel that cooperation, that everyone is working together like that, it really is important for developing and maintaining our faith. So that was also very, very instructive. And that's really the last pastime with Srila Prabhupada that I think I want to share.